John R. Allen, Jr. Doc, because I was a country veterinarian and picked up the nickname of Doc. I now live in Waverly, Ohio, 45690. That's the zip code. My hometown is Waverly, Ohio. Let's see, 43 and 20. I was 20 years old at induction time, enlisted. I received my training at Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis, Indiana, and at Kearns, Utah for basic training, and Fitzsimmons General Hospital for medical technician training, and also medical laboratory technician training. That was all the training that I had in the service. My rank was a private to a PFC to a corporal to a sergeant in the 716th Bomb Squadron, the 449th Bomb Group. I flew overseas and I don't remember the name of the crew. The aircraft was a B-24 Heavy. How did you drive in Gotagli? I drive there by airplane, by flying from Fort Benjamin Harrison in Morrison Field in Florida, through South America, across South America, over to Dakar, Africa, up the coast of Africa into French Morocco, and then finally over into Gotagli, Italy, where Mussolini had his first Air Force Academy. It had been bombed out by the Americans from Africa, and that's where we were stationed from 1943 of December until we came back home in 45.
And when did you arrive? When did you arrive?
In Gotagli, December of 1943. Spent Christmas Day there. I was in Italy from 1943, you got 44 there, but I was in there from 1943 to 1945. My story? Now, what do you want in my way of my story here at this point?
Okay, could you tell us, you were a medic there,
Okay.
and you were there for quite a long time.
Yes.
So I'm sure you have many stories to tell about being
Well,
a medic.
To begin with, as a medic, we were charged with getting the troops vaccinated for all the various diseases that were prevalent overseas. We didn't know if we were going to South Pacific or where, but we finally went to Europe. And we had to get the troops all vaccinated, and that was the gunners and all the people on the airplanes and all the ground crews. And some of the flight people hated vaccinations and wouldn't show up. So the surgeons got together and asked me and another fellow named Herman Ingram, a medic from Roanoke, Virginia, if we could fix up something some way. And we fixed up a Jeep with an ice box in it, and we put the vaccines and the serum in this ice chest, and with the Jeep, and we went out on the flight line. And we met the boys getting on the planes and getting off. And they were very angry with us, but we finally got all of them vaccinated, including the officers. And even Dar Alcar, who was our commander, he would come in and he'd ask me if I'd give him his shot. He liked the way I give him, I guess. But anyway, that was that. And so they chose us to fly overseas with this group. They got there before the ground crew got over on a boat, and we were to set up medical dispensaries for each squadron and headquarters squadron. And we that's the reason why we got to fly over. And so we did do that when we got there. And of course we had to dig a lot of trench holes and things when we first got there. But we had a dental crew and 4 squadron crews and a headquarters squadron to build a place for medical treatments. And we did that, and then we would have to go out after we were there. We would have to go out on a flight line with the ambulance certain days, maybe 3 days a week. And then at the other times we'd be treating some of the soldiers at the base, where our dispensary was. But this dispensaries were all around vineyards and orchards of oranges and tangerines and olives, and it was in the country like. And so the medics were called upon because some of the people that processed the grapes were women, about all of them, and the men laid in the shade and watched them work. And they would have big heavy loads that they would carry the grapes to the place where they trumped them and they made the wine. And some of those ladies were well along in pregnancy, and some of them would have babies, and they would call all of our medics together and get over to get these people to get them into a hospital. Some of them were born on the way to the hospital. But that was one of the side things. And a lot of the side things, people in the town found out the medics were there, and they would come there, and then they would beg for treatment, and of course we treated some of them, that is, with the doctor's jurisdiction. And with that, I did take place with the basketball team and a softball team over there, and at the early part of the history of that, we had a lot of planes that got knocked down, got shot down, because our fighter planes weren't quite as fast as the German Messerschmitt, and so we had a lot of casualties. And eventually, the boys from Tuskegee, Alabama, the colored boys, black boys, came with the P-51s and the Mustangs and the faster planes, and when they came, in the 44s and all, they chased the Messerschmitts back to Germany, and they shot a lot of them down. And that time on, our planes were able to carry more gasoline, more bombs, and more heavy ammunition, and went to the farthest places there was, like in Plestia and Romania and places, and they destroyed the refineries, and also the heavy munition factories in Germany, and all of the railroads in Italy and in northern Italy and in Germany. They destroyed those with the help of the Tuskegee Airmen, which was a key thing in World War II, the European part of it. And of course, then after the war ended there in June, we made way to come back, and I was shipped back on a boat. But going overseas, I got to fly over South America and over into Africa, and we were weathered in at Marrakech, French Morocco, because one of our lead planes crashed up in those Atlas Mountains, and they stopped all the rest of us from going on for a while till the weather got better. But while we were there, I want to tell you this story. While we were there in the lunchroom, you might say the chow room, and at our table there was some enlisted men, and a big C-47s landed there, and onto these planes came President Roosevelt, Stalin, Montgomery, Churchill, Eisenhower, and they all came in that mess hall where we were. And Eisenhower came over to the table that this 5 or 6 enlisted men were, not all of us were medics, and some gunners on these planes, and he wanted to know what we was doing there. We said, we got weathered in. How did you get here? He said, we got ways of getting in. And he said, I know where you're going to Italy. And that's the first time we knew we were going to Italy. We got to talk to Eisenhower, and or listen to him. And so that was one story that I happened to have. But one of the boys that crashed up in that plane in the Atlas Mountains, his name was Joe Meisner from over in Philadelphia, and he was picked to fly in my place, or I was picked to fly in his place. Anyway, I got to fly, and we got to pick the pilots or the airplane crew we'd go with. I picked out one that I knew pretty well. I don't remember their names now, but anyway, he picked out another plane, and he picked out one of those the head plane, and it cracked up and killed them all. And he told me one time in Dayton that he wasn't mad at me anymore because he would have lost his life if he'd have got to fly over there. He would have been with that crew. But several stories like that are, I could tell, but I won't burden you with all that.
Tell us any stories you want to tell.
We had one fellow that met me in Tucson, and he had been a top gunner. And he came in about 2 o'clock in the morning when they were getting ready for the flight, and he was sick and he had the diarrhea very bad. And we had a lot of dysentery over there. And he was running a temperature, and I'd taken it, and the captain was asleep yet. And I was on duty that night, and I said, well, you can't go and with that temperature, and you got the diarrhea real bad. You know, he was up in the top gunner. And so I said, I'll have to call the captain in if you don't take my word for it. And the captain said no. He took him out, and he said, no, you can't go. So he didn't go. So he came to Tucson, and Captain Pedersen, who was Major Pedersen, was the head surgeon for the whole group. And then we had 4 other flight surgeons and a dental surgeon. And anyway, he said, I'd like to speak to one of the medics, and he said, is that John Allen, if you know him? He said, Major Pedersen said, well, he's right here talking to me now. And he said, come on, I want you to meet my wife and 2 daughters. And I went with him, and I didn't know what he wanted me to meet them, you know, in a way, but I went, and he said, I want you to meet the guy that saved my life. And he said, if it hadn't been for him, I'd have been on that plane, and I'd never got to go back to Texas, Tyler, Texas. He was head of the airport down there at that time. And that's just one thing that happened. Those 2 stories are true stories, and that happened. That makes you feel good sometimes. But still, I felt bad about the boys that went down.
What was it like? You were there a very long time, so you saw a lot of people come and go. What was it like being there, you know, taking care of these folks when they were coming back from missions?
Well, we had to keep the first aid kits supplied in the planes, and there's a lot of anxiety about flying. And in the early days there was a lot of casualties and a lot of prisoners of war. A lot of planes crashed, and we even had planes crashed on practice missions. And it was tough treating those people, and we were strafed by the Germans with their fast airplanes. They came in and strafed us, and we had to hide in trenches and foxholes and stuff that we had dug out away from where our general living places was. And it was kind of tough that way to have to treat these boys, and some of them, well, did I tell you about the soldier's medal?
No, please tell us about that.
Okay, well, we were on the flight line one day, and Wallace Higley and Herman Ingram and I, and it was our duty to take care of all the wounded and take them to the different places that they had to go, either a field hospital or a general hospital at Barry, Italy, or something like that, or we could take care of it ourselves. And not only that, but we were charged with pouring all the boys that wanted it a drink of whiskey, and we had to keep the whiskey under lock, and we kept the inventory on it and all. But then we were there. But they would be interrogated by the intelligence officers about what happened on the flight and all. But we weren't in on that room. We were in another room where we would pour the whiskey for them after we got all the wounded took care of. And some of them didn't drink, and some of them did. But at one point, I maybe dare not tell this, but you see, in those first aid kits was morphine, and it was fixed so that they could inject themselves if they were wounded very bad for the pain. But some of the boys got so they wanted to take that before they went on the flight, and that kept it was a tough thing to get in there and have those German fighters shooting at you. And you know, and the flak from the artillery from down below. See, the Italian B-24s had to hit a lot of. In Italy, it was called Brenner Pass, but that's where a railroad went through and through the mountains. and they knocked out all the bridges and all of the tracks and things that they could, you know, to keep them from Germans getting supplies to come down into Italy, and that was kind of tough too. But anyway, when the war ended in June, why we began to come back home, and they said that we was going to go to South Pacific and get planes for the big B-52s. But on the way back to the United States, something happened, and they turned us up to Boston, and our plane ground crews all come into Boston, Camp Miles Standish in Boston, Maine. Or Boston, not Maine. I guess that's in Maine, isn't it?
Massachusetts.
Yeah, and Camp Miles Standish. And that's where we were sent there, then to Camp Atterbury, Indiana, and I was discharged. Well, I wasn't discharged there. I was sent home for vacation and time, and then I went back to Camp Atterbury, and they shipped me to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to an Air Force place, and they put me in the hospital there as a lab technician until they discharged me from the Army in September '45. And after that, I went to veterinary school.
So you had started to talk a little bit about the Soldier's Medal. Can you talk about...
Soldier's Medal, well, one day, and we were on the flight line, the three of us, and a plane from Italy, or from England, a Wellington bomber, medium-sized bomber, came in and crashed in the olive grove, coming back from a mission. And with the crash, the ammunition that they had left on the plane went off. They'd already dropped their bombs, but the ammunition and the fuel is a terrific fire, and all that was going off, and we had to go in there, and some of these boys were in the trees and hanging around, you know, and fire and everything. And we got 4 of them out of there. Now 2 of them were dead, and we got 4 of them out of there and took them to a British hospital in Catania, Italy. And I was told that they all lived. I never heard anything more about it, but they were all British people. And so then the people got together and gave us a soldier's medal. And they had some colonel come there from the Army somewhere and gave us a soldier's medal. And I guess it's not put out too often, but
That's wonderful.
and the 3 of us got that. But one day, I got a letter in the mail from Wallace Higley's son, and his dad had died, and he got going through his things that he had, and he found that, and then he called me and wanted to know about that, what we did, you know, and I told him about it, yeah. But I haven't heard anything from any of the medics for quite a while.
So when you were there, would you take care of people, sort of triage them right as they came off the plane? Would you triage them?
Well, we had to take them off sometimes on litters and and put them in ambulances and take them to various places, and sometimes they could walk off themselves, and sometimes they had severe bleeding. We'd have to give them blood transfusions, and I had to do all the blood typing. I was a lab technician for that sort of thing. See? And if some kid had appendicitis out in the field, you had to do blood typing, and that's not an easy job, but you can't make no mistakes.
Right.
You know, and that was part of the job that I did. And then we saw sick people all the time that come in and wanted treatment. But of course we did it all under a doctor's care. You know, we had doctor bosses, but they were all good people. They'd all been doctors, had practiced medicine, and came right into the Army. And even my doctors taught the lab technician and the medics at Fitzsimmons General Hospital in Denver, Colorado. They were all practitioners that came into the Army, and they give it to you just like you ought to have it, instead of all in books, you know. I mean, it was good training for me. It helped me all my life, you know, even through my veterinary business. It was a great help.
When you
I
were
don't know if they got any more questions.
when you were discharged, you went back to your veterinary practice?
No, when I was discharged, it was in September. And all the medical schools that I tried to get into were filled up. They wasn't taking anybody. And I tried Louisville, Kentucky, and Columbus, and I believe that, and I just kind of got discouraged. And a friend of mine that I'd been in high school with was in veterinary school. He got discharged early because he had a ruptured appendix, and they got him out of the Army because he was been a hindrance to them, and they would have had to give him a lot of treatment and stuff, so they discharged him. And he was in veterinary school at Ohio State, and he said, "Come up, and I'll send you over to some people, and maybe you get in." And well, I went up in September, and they'd already started. And the dean of the college said, "Well, you go to school, and when we get your grades from Miami University at Oxford, Ohio," said, "if they're okay, you can stay in class." I proxied the classes for about a week, and then they came in and they said, "You're all set, go ahead." And I went there then, I graduated there in 49. I went there in 45 and graduated in 49. And I went to Waverly, Ohio, and I practiced rural veterinary medicine for, you might say, close to 55 years.
Large animals?
Huh? I'm retired now.
Large animals?
90%, I'd say, but we had a uranium enrichment plant came to the county, and that brought in a lot of people. And they took up a lot of the land where a lot of my farm work was. And so I had to change a little bit. I probably came down to about 75, 25, 25% small animal, maybe 75% large. But I loved the large animal work because I'd grown up on a farm. And both of my grandparents were farmers. My dad was a ball player and a paper mill worker. And that's kind of the way it was. And I had this wonderful girl here, and her mother. She's a pediatrician doctor. And I asked her one time, "You ought to go to veterinary school. I can maybe get you in up there." She said, "Dad, I'm going to work where it's warm, well lighted, and clean."
A little different.
That's what she told me, and she went on. You do very well with it. She's had a heart transplant.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. This is what, about the third year? Fourth year since she had a heart transplant.
Wow.
Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio.
Congratulations. So is there anything more you want to talk about? Mary was talking a lot about wanting, since we've never never interviewed anybody else that's a medic. Anything more that you'd like to just talk? You've talked a lot about what you did there. You know, the crews would come in and then they would fly their 50 missions and then they'd get to go. Was that hard for you, that people would come and go but you were staying? Was that hard?
No, it wasn't hard. They was all just good old American boys and girls, and so wasn't too many girls. I don't think, some nurses now and then, but no, you got used to that. You knew they were going to go. I know that one of the fellows became our squadron commander after one had 50 missions, and he was from Texas, and he was a pretty astute-like fellow. He played on the softball team for the officers, and the enlisted men beat him, and I played on the enlisted men's team. And he didn't like that very well. He played first base, and he came back after the war. He was our squadron commander there at the last, and he's one of those that came in late, and he became a U.S. Senator and became a U.S. Treasurer, I believe.
Huh.
His name was Lloyd Benston. Does that ring a bell?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he was our commanding officer, the last commanding officer I had. And one day in Washington, D.C., some of our county officials, I was a county official as a county commissioner in my county for 20 consecutive years, as well as a veterinarian, and I worked my heart out. I had to have some work done on it. But anyway, he was on an elevator with them as they were coming down. The treasurer of our county and the auditor were on there, and they said, they saw his name tag, and they said, when they got off the elevator, they asked him, they said, "Say, sir, we'd like to ask you a question." He said, "Do you know a guy named Doc Allen?" That was my nickname around home. He said, "No, I don't know." He said, "Well," he said, "he was in the service with you." And he said, "Well, I never knew no Doc Allen, but I knew a John Allen." And that took him by surprise. And so that was that story about that. He run for vice president, you know.
That's right.
And of course I was Republican, but I couldn't hardly vote for him, but I still liked him. Yeah.
That's good.
I want to tell you about Christmas Day in 1943. Colonel Alcar, who was our first commander, he got captured on the plane went down, and he was, did I tell you this? He was captured and made prisoner of war. And later on, after a couple of years, he was in prison. He gave him fits. I mean, he was a really straight old army man, and he said, "Now, I want the troops to have ice cream on Christmas Day." He said, "You and Ingram go to town and find the cleanest, nicest, best ice cream place, and we'll have them make ice cream for all of us for Christmas Day." And we did. We went to town and took a couple of days to find a place, and then he had all the ice cream brought out for the troops at our base that day. I should have told you that story in the beginning, but that's one story, and that's one thing about him. They traded him back to the United States for 2 German generals. I read that, and that's a true story. Because I read it, and it was an army story, but I lost track of him after that. But you're Floyd, I think, and somebody has a nice story in one of the letters that I have from him. I brought it with me. Should I bring it in to you?
Sure.
And show you that story. Not about the ice cream, but about, it's a nice story about Dar Alcar.
Okay.
Who was the first commander. He started out with Tucson, through Alamogordo, New Mexico, and on all the way over there. And then he got prisoner of war, and then he stayed in the army. After he got back over here, he went to, it tells about it in that little story. And I'll get that out of that white thing that I got.
Yeah.
Yeah. And don't let me forget to bring it to him.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.